will have read the stuff you guys already wrote up about the book?
Probably. We've promoted it. Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for your patience today. We, meaning me, had a little bit of technical difficulty. And Carole was so wonderful to be patient with me on that. We are going to get started. I'm very excited for this session. A couple of items. Firstly, I'm Kate. I am CEO of Women 2.0. And this is part of our leadership series. We do a lot, of course, with startups and the VC and the ecosystem and all of that good stuff. But one huge thing for our entire audience is leadership, management, skills, and relationship building is so important in that. And as we will talk with Carole about also many of the things that she has taught at her Stanford Business School course and the impetus of this book can be applied to all parts of your life. So with that, a couple of logistical items. If you have anything that you'd like to ask as we're going along, please feel free to type in the chat. We always love comments. Let us know where you're chiming in from, and we'll get started.
Great. Thank you, Kate.
And is there a little bit of a, hold on, are you hearing a reverb, Carole?
I am not. I'm hearing you perfectly.
Oh, super. I love it. Okay. Well, the first thing, Carole, I would love you to introduce yourself just a little bit. And as part of that introduction, talk to us all about where this book came from specifically.
Sure. So I'm Carole Robin. I've had 6 different careers. I am not a career academic. It would take way too long to tell you what all of them have been, but they've included being an executive in sales and marketing for a big company and being a coach and being a consultant and a partner in a big firm. And of course, teaching at Stanford at the Graduate School of Business for 17 years, and now co-founding a startup called Leaders in Tech, which brings everything I taught at Stanford to the CEO founders in Silicon Valley in a certain range of size company. The book came from, so my co-author, David Bradford, who's kind of the father of touchy-feely. Touchy-feely is this course that we taught. It's called Interpersonal Dynamics, but all the students affectionately called it touchy-feely. And he and I had both been approached independently and separately by people wanting us to write a book. And we'd always said, no, you actually can't learn how to be more interpersonally competent by reading about it or even listening to me talk about it. You actually have to do it. So about 5 years ago, an editor from Penguin Random House came to us and said, so let's see, you've taught this class that for decades, thousands and thousands of students have said was worth the price of tuition for 2 years at the Graduate School of Business, and has called it the most transformational and the gift that keeps on giving. Really, how come there's no book? So we gave him the same answer. And then he said, so how are you okay having the only people who develop these skills and competencies be those that are lucky enough and privileged enough to go to the Stanford Graduate School of Business? And that's when David and I looked at each other and said, guess we're going to have to learn to write a book. So he is the father of touchy-feely. I came to be known as the queen of touchy-feely. And it seemed like the two of us should be the two people to at least give it a shot. So that's the background.
Fantastic. Well, we're so glad that you've given us access to this. Let's go right to the core first. And we're talking about interpersonal relationships, connections. The entire title of your book is Connect. What are the hallmarks of, when you think about these relationships, what are the hallmarks of these types of relationships wherever they might be applied?
So first, it's important to note that relationships exist on a continuum. At one end of the continuum, there's basically contact and no connection. We've all experienced that. And actually, sometimes just plain old dysfunction. At the other end of the continuum, there's something we might call exceptional, which that we ended up calling exceptional based on this experience and what we saw students achieve over the year, when we taught the course. But the continuum means that it's not a switch. And so it's a dial. Trying to create an exceptional relationship with every person in your life is impractical and exhausting. As you learn all the skills that are needed to do that, though, you at least get to functional and some robust and strong. And so we want to make sure everyone at least has the capacity to build that. And then it's up to you whether or not you want to take it all the way to exceptional. Now, the hallmarks are that you both feel more known by each other, and you can be more fully yourselves. And it's also that you trust that disclosures won't be used against you, and you can be honest with each other. You are willing to lean forward into conflict and handle it productively, as opposed to bearing it or running away from it. And you're both committed to each other's learning, your own and each other's learning and growth. And when you have all of those in the most, at one end, then you have exceptional. But you can have some of those to different degrees and still have a strong, robust relationship.
Great. And I love that, because one of the ways I almost read or translated that continuum, you repeat in the book, that's okay for you to not have an exceptional relationship with everybody. I almost took it to myself as on that continuum, it's almost as if the exceptionalism can come on that continuum and is still very powerful.
Absolutely.
Even if it's a short work relationship that might be not direct, a short passing that you might have during the day or something like that. So I really appreciated that.
Thanks.
And we'll get back. Also, you mentioned the act of disclosure is too. So we'll get back to that in a little bit. But couple of really neat things. So you break the book down. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the ways that we can start thinking about framing this as you lay the book?
Yeah, thanks for that. Because one of the reasons it took us 4 years to write this book, and by the way, for all of you who have had children, it was like being pregnant for 3.5 years. And then it was like being in labor for 6 months. And now I have this baby and I'm desperately looking for my village to help me raise it. So I love metaphors. The dilemma, as I said earlier, was that, first of all, you're not going to get 5 easy tips on creating better relationships. Every interaction with another human being is an opportunity to learn more about yourself, about them, and about how to be more effective interpersonally. And they are all different. So the dilemma for us was exactly your question, which is, how do we help a reader get traction in the way that the students get traction, because they're together in these groups? So what we did is, in addition to kind of conveying the concepts through stories of amalgamations of people we've known, 2 work colleagues, a man and a woman, 2 buddies, 2 women who've known each other since college, a father and a daughter, etc. At the end of every chapter, we have a section called Deepen Your Learning. And we don't see this as a book that you pick up in New York on your flight to San Francisco, read and say, oh, that was interesting, and put back in your shelf. I mean, it's one thing you can do with it, and we're hoping that you do more than that. So we ask you to identify a few people in your life with whom you'd like deeper, more meaningful, robust relationships. And then use that with a whole guideline at the end of every chapter that's called Deepen Your Learning, to go try some of this stuff and then reflect on what it is that you learned. And by the way, that's exactly the process the students go through. So that's the way to get the most out of the book, and also the most learning.
Great. And that's actually really interesting. A friend who was reading the book was also curious, those exercises at the end of the book, what what, if anything, is the translation? Basically, your students in class, what ends up being the most powerful process in that class for them? You allude to a little bit of just literally the application, but is there any specific piece, specific module, whatever, that's like, oh my gosh?
Well, there are several. There's not one. The first thing that happens is, well, first of all, they get in this group, and the first thing they think is, oh my God, that jerk is in my group. I got to be with them for a whole quarter in this intimate setting. And the first thing, and one of the things that happens is that over the quarter, as they interact in these ways, they end up best friends, and best friends for life, when they didn't think in a million years they'd ever even like each other. That's related to a very big lesson that which is updating their mental models and beliefs and assumptions about what creates relationship, about disclosure. Oh my God, if I show you that part of me, if I tell you that, you're going to think less of me, or you're going to think I'm weak, or you're, this, hey, we came to Stanford Business School because, this is where our network for the rest of our life is going to, be. And yet what they learn is that the more they allow themselves to be known, the more influential they are, and the more other people are drawn to them, the less they spin their image. And by the way, I'm in Silicon Valley and I work with CEO founders. And I've discovered the same thing in leaders in tech, which is they believe that they have to spin their image in order to be successful. And when they learn that the less they spin their image and the more real they get, the more effective they are, that's a big lesson for them. The other mental model is, oh man, I don't give feedback because it just is a problem. It's like stepping in a pile of doo-doo. And yes, that's happened to all of us, mostly because we don't know how to do it well. Lots of chapters in the book about that. However, what the students learn is, oh, actually, if I learn how to give you feedback effectively, it actually builds relationship. You actually trust me more, because if I'm doing something that really bugs me and I don't tell you and I just let you keep doing it, am I really doing you and us a favor? I don't think so. So they update their beliefs and assumptions about feedback. They also learn about the power of repair, which is, yeah, we'll have a conflict. Things will, I'll say something, you completely, you took it totally not in the direction I wanted. And it's an opportunity for learning. We're back to every interaction is an opportunity for learning, if that's how you approach it. So I think there are a lot of really powerful lessons. And frankly, I get emails and letters from students 10, 15 years later, and calls with what you might predict, which is, I just became a CEO. I owe it to the class. But I also get, pretty sure your class just saved my marriage. I just reconciled a relationship with a friend of mine. We hadn't talked to each other in a year. And by the way, thank you for finally writing a book, because he didn't go to the GSB. And I bought him a book and I sat down with mine and we went through it together. So, it's that most people are just lack a lot of skills and competencies. And as a result of that, they create these beliefs and assumptions about what will happen if they try any of these things.
Great. Let's dive into a couple of these skills, because I love this. You've mentioned both vulnerability and disclosure, and then also feedback. Let's start with vulnerability and disclosure. So
yep.
This idea of, okay, I'm sharing myself, which is
yep.
part of deepening a relationship, but there's got to be something there that allows it to feel safe, accepted, and productive. So Let's talk about that right there. How can we think about vulnerability and disclosing in a positive way?
So let's start with acknowledging that it's risky. It feels risky and it is risky. So it's another dial. It's not a switch. I don't tell you anything. Bleh, I tell you everything. It's a dial. And so one of the things it's in the book, and one of the things we used to help the students understand is that we all have a comfort zone, stuff that we don't think twice about saying. We have a danger zone. In a million years would I tell you that. But there's this zone in the middle. Think of 3 concentric circles. There's this circle in the middle called the learning zone. Anybody who's in education knows that's fundamental education theory. It's why they don't start you when you learn to ski on a double black diamond slope. It's also why they don't leave you on a bunny slope. So we used to say to students, when it comes to experimenting with disclosure and the risk, you'll have to step outside your safety zone into your learning zone. And they used to say, yeah, but the minute I've stepped outside my safety zone, how do I know I'm not in my danger zone? So we came up with this thing called the 15% rule, which is think about stepping a little bit outside your comfort zone. We call it 15%. Okay. And what happens is it's a small enough risk that it's still manageable for both of you. Doesn't freak the other person out. Unlikely to freak me out that I even said that. And if what it leads to is a willingness on the part of the other person to also step outside their 15% rule, because by the way, disclosure is reciprocal. You want someone else to allow themselves to get known. You can't ask them to take all the risk. And then I assess, and guess what happens? My safety zone with that person gets a little bit bigger. And then I can decide whether I'm going to go 15% beyond that or just stay there for a while until I feel safe and comfortable and do it again. So that's how we learn and grow relationships, especially with people we don't know very well or we don't know at all. And, for example, if I was going to try that with you right now, Kate, I would tell you that the last 6 months have been probably the most difficult 6 months of my entire professional career. And that's because I was so excited about getting this work out into the world. And I've been incredibly disillusioned and disappointed in not being able to get it to help more people know that it even exists. That felt risky.
Wow.
My 15% might be very different than yours or someone else watching. And by the way, it's even riskier because I could probably do it with you on a one-on-one more easily than I have no idea how many people are on the call. And I also believe that one of the things that we need to do as leaders is role model. And so I had to step outside my comfort zone a little bit.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And as we're sort of talking through this too, because as you deepen relationships, you're talking about reciprocity as well, is if you reach a point at which you feel that you might be entering quote unsafe territory, or perhaps the extent of the relationship has been reached, is that just a gut check? Are there a couple of things that we, kind of bigger things that are trending that are that indicate that perhaps the receiving party, so to speak, may not be the right place for you to focus to have a deep relationship with?
Yeah, I love that question. So some of it, a lot of it is in noticing how the other person responds. Do they, first of all, do they respond in a way that makes you feel a little more comfortable having taken the risk you did just take? Second of all, note whether or not they are, whether they're actually also sharing something with you. You also can always, if you're worried, I'm worried that I'm being too much, I can get curious. I can inquire. I can say to you, Kate, what do you think? Was that too much? Were you ready for that? You think your audience was ready for that? I'm feeling nervous about it. That in and of itself is a disclosure, by the way. And so I like to err on the side of what I might call appropriate authenticity. So nobody is advocating telling everything to everyone or even anyone. It's assessing what's appropriate for the relationship and the context. So when I was a VP, I wasn't a VP of marketing, but if I was a VP, I was a director of marketing and sales. But if I'm the VP of marketing and I stand up in front of all the troops and I say, well, gang, third month in a row, we've lost market share. I have no idea what to do about it. I don't know what's happening. And I really feel inadequate, not sure I should be your VP of marketing. That's actually inappropriate authenticity. And that's not what I'm advocating. However, if I don't say anything, everybody knows we were losing market share. That doesn't make me more credible either. So I can stand up and say, okay, gang. So a lot of you already know this is the third month in a row we've lost market share. Feels crummy. I wish I had the answers all figured out, and I don't. I'm working on some. I've got some ideas about what we can do, and I've never needed you all more than I do right now. Think about the difference. And that's also vulnerable. I need you. I need your help. I don't have all the answers. One of the biggest mistakes leaders make is believing that they need to have the answer. It's not your job as a leader. Your job as a leader is to ensure the best answer is found and to ask the best questions. So that's an example of a lot of leaders don't admit they've made a mistake. They don't admit, and because they're afraid of being vulnerable. Oh, there's vulnerable and there's vulnerable. Is that helpful?
Very, very helpful. And it draws a little bit also towards this idea of staying true to yourself while also showing up and being that leader. So, we have, obviously, we have quite a few women in our audience. In that realm, how can women in particular think about showing up as a leader effectively, staying true to themselves, and really moving forward with a nice sense of vulnerability, disclosure, and deeply building relationships in a positive way?
Yeah. So it's another great question. So for starters, good leaders are good learners. To the extent that a leader demonstrates an openness to learning, they're more credible, whether they're men or women. Some of what I'm going to talk about is going to be in a moment. It's going to be a little more focused towards women, but I want to start with a source of power. The research shows a source of power for leaders is being what we call a referent figure, somebody that other people admire, respect, want to be more like. That's what referent means. I mean, it's not the only source of power. You also need expertise. People need to believe you know what you're talking about. And there are other sources of power, but those two are the ones that are most highly correlated with building high-performing organizations. So another source of power is where you are in the hierarchy. If you're the CEO. Interesting, the research shows that there's no correlation between using that as your primary source of power and how effective you are or how high performing your organization is. Other sources of power are the rewards and punishments you set up. By the way, a leader needs all of those. However, leaders who foreground those two, actually, the research shows, build the least performing organizations. So yeah, you need them all, and useful to know that people are more likely to walk through walls for you if there's something about you that they really respect and admire and want to be more like.
Great. Just as we're talking through this too, one of the feelings I had reading the book that just came back to me also is this idea of having these deeper relationships. Think about leadership and your role within a company and moving an entire ship forward. The goal of the relationship is not to be everybody's friend.
Correct.
It's not to be to have deep, ultra personal relationships with everybody and
correct
and that sort of thing. So what's a good way for us to think about this in the realm, especially of the workplace, but of course that extends elsewhere
Yeah.
in terms of really, what are we talking about with this type of relationship?
Okay, good. So let's go back to what I and tie that your current question to the what about women in particular. So women in particular, many hold mental models that really get in their way and that they need to update. And the thing about
Carole,
what?
No, we don't. I'm joking. Yes.
Yeah. Well, and the reason, and all we develop mental models very early in our career, and and so then because of behaviors that served us, but then we don't ever stop to think about whether or not we need to update them. For example, I was the first woman hired into a non-clerical job in the largest industrial automation company in the world in 1975. So yes, I'm old. And the first thing I learned was, holy crap, better leave my feelings in the parking lot. No place in the business world for feelings. And it served me very well. And 10 years later, I was running a $50 million region, and I was at an offsite with my team. I'd had them for now a couple of years, and they were all guys. I'd finally fixed that, but at this point, they're still guys. And I got a little excited about something I thought we could do, and I got crickets. I got a little more excited. I got crickets. Finally, I was like, "Come on, you guys, what's wrong? Why can't you see how cool this could be?" And one of them leaned in and said, "Carole, is that water in the corner of your eye? Oh my God, are you going to cry?" And then he said, "Are you human after all?" And that's when I burst out crying. And I said, "You don't think I'm human? I don't think there's anything more important for us to talk about than that." And I tore up our agenda, and we spent the next 2 days talking about who we were, why we were there, what we needed from each other. And to this day, I believe that is the day we became a team, or those were the 2 days that we became a team. And I believe that is the moment when I became a leader.
Wow. Talk about vulnerability right there.
Now, let me just point out, I do not advocate you burst out if I'd burst out into tears 2 months after I joined, I'd have never made it to running a $50 million region. So I also hadn't updated my mental models. And what had happened is nobody saw me as human anymore. I also would not have, I mean, it was kind of a knee-jerk reaction, and it was a big moment of vulnerability. And it was a huge lesson for me. And after that, I continually tried to stay aware of how much a prior mental model was holding me back from advancing a relationship, instead of just being locked into, I've got to be a certain way. The other thing that I want to say about women, or speak to about a huge source of power that women have. One of the things we talk about in the book is these two antennae. We have antenna that help us pick up on what am I feeling? And we have an antenna that helps us pick up what might be going on for the other person. And the more you've developed both of those antennae, the more interpersonally competent you're going to be. The more you're going to sense, first of all, the more you're going to be in touch with what's going on for you, and you're going to sense what's going on for the other person. And a lot of women have been accused of being too sensitive. Well, hell, if the result of your sensitivity is that your two antennae pick up even more subtle signals, and that makes you even more interpersonally effective, how is that a problem? And when somebody will say to, people don't usually say to me, "You're too sensitive," but I have heard them say that to other women, and they've come to me and say, "What do I do when they tell me I'm too sensitive?" I say, well, one response is, yeah, I do pick up a lot of what's going on for myself and for other people.
Very good. This conversation has a good segue into talking about feedback, and I'll take one moment of vulnerability myself, speaking of crying. When I started my real world, I jumped right into the tech startup space. And for several years, I didn't get feedback. There was no feedback system in there.
Yeah.
And I got my MBA. And during my MBA internship, I had my very first one-on-one feedback session with my boss, who was a wonderful, wonderful human. But I got in my feedback session and there was a lot of good stuff, didn't hear it, got the negative stuff, and I started to cry right on the spot. Right in my MBA internship, not supposed to do that, all the stuff. So let's talk about feedback because it's tough.
Good.
And you talk about feedback being the breakfast of championship. So let's dive in and really talk about how feedback is powerful and how we can think about accepting it, internalizing it, etc.
So before I go down that path, what do you think those tears were about, Kate?
Those tears were definitely feeling inadequate, feeling as if I did not perform. I did not feel attacked, but I felt very, very, my God, I have not done my job here and
Right.
I have failed
Right.
and all of it.
Right.
That was
Right.
the space I was in.
My suspicion is that he never said you're not doing your job and you
Nope.
have failed at everything.
Nope.
But that's
Nope.
what you heard.
Yes.
So the first thing to note, first of all, feedback is data. It is always data, which is why I never use the words positive and negative feedback. It's data. We're all better off with data, more data than no data. So that's another mental model to update. Second of all, if you're doing something that I fear might result in you being less effective, or if you're doing something that's problematic for me, I have to believe that you are better off knowing it than not knowing it because it expands your choices. And vice versa. If I'm doing something that's problematic for you, I trust you more if I know you'll tell me than letting me just continue to do something that turns out to be, I mean, that's part of investing in someone else's learning and growth, right? Now, there's lots of different kinds of feedback. I'm talking about interpersonal feedback, not, you know, you don't do the right job on this report, not, you know, it's, I'm talking about interpersonal feedback. You know, I've sat in a lot of meetings with you. This last one is a good example. You interrupted me 4 times during the course of that meeting. So first, you got to be behaviorally specific. And I think I owe it to tell you that when when you interrupt me that way, I get irritated and frustrated. And the more it happens, the less tolerance I have for it. And period. Your behavior, how it's made me feel, and my intent in telling you. My intent in telling you this is that I think we're both better off if we talk about it. And the purpose of feedback, I don't use negative. The purpose of constructive feedback or developmental feedback is to move into problem solving. So is there something about what I'm doing that's making it hard to wait until I finished? Now you've provided something for someone else that's data, and you've invited them into further conversation about what to do about it. Most people, however, don't know how to do that. And there's a whole model in the book. It's the model of 3 realities and staying on your side of the net. And I don't know if we've got time to go into all that because it'll probably take too much time. And the reason we develop these mental models about how feedback is bad is that we don't do it right. And then, of course, our mental model solidifies. Well, that didn't go well. I'm not doing that again. Do we get better at something that we don't do because it didn't go well? No. So, you know, it takes 2 to know 1. It's one of the sayings that I think it's in the book, but definitely talk about it in the class, which is, I am blind to some of the things that I do that are ineffective. And until you tell me, I remain blind. So isn't it an act of care to actually tell me?
Yeah.
It does require courage, though, and it requires vulnerability.
Yeah, let's talk right there about that courage piece. And as I was reading this section too, I my brain went to another great book from a woman author, Kim Scott, Radical Candor,
Yeah.
and she talks about caring personally and being direct when you need to talk about tough things. But that area of this is, you just gave the example of being the feedback giver. And there is probably, I would say, one of the biggest hurdles is, even if you know you care about being constructive, let's say you're at the beginning of a relationship, for instance, you're not sure how deep it is. How can you think about getting the courage up and making sure that, well, geez, what if it's not accepted? What if they don't know I care and I'm trying to, how can we think about that so we do it?
Yeah. So first of all, there are parts of Kim Scott's work that I like, and I will be totally honest with you and tell you that some of it I'm just not a big fan of. Um, I I believe in directness because I think that builds relationship. I think that it has to be accompanied with care, as she does, and people don't always hear the care. So the first thing to do is, if they respond in a way that's unexpected for you, move into inquiry. This is a big piece missing in her work. What did you just hear me say? Well, I heard you say that I'm incompetent and I don't know what I'm doing. Wow, really glad I asked, because that's not what I thought I heard, but I do believe that what I said, but I do believe that's what you heard. Look, example, I come in, this is many years ago. My husband's now a gourmet cook, but we had swapped jobs and he was staying home and he was learning how to cook. And I come in the kitchen, I see him struggling. I say, "Can I help you with that?" And his response is, "Don't tell me what to do." I'm sure nobody can relate to that one.
Never heard it in my life before.
And I say, "Gosh, honey, what did you hear me say?" And he said, "I heard you say, I don't know what I'm doing." And I said, "Wow, really glad. I thought I was just offering to help. And what do you think might have gotten in the way of you actually hearing my words? What's this about for you?" And that's when he said, my older brother used to lord it over me and made me feel incompetent. And anything that even starts to smack of my not knowing what I'm doing really gets me agitated. We'd been married 12 years at that point, and I did not know this. All right. So inquiry and curiosity are a really important part of feedback. And by the way, it's impossible to be curious if you're judging someone else. So you have to suspend judgment or you won't be curious. You can't be like, "I know what's going on for you," and then ask, because people will pick that up. You have to be genuine, like, "Wow, what's happening there?" The other thing I'll say is that for a leader, being a good receiver of feedback is really important, even if it's given incredibly poorly. So somebody comes in and says, you can't ever, you're so wishy-washy. You can't ever seem to make up your mind. You keep giving me different assignments. And well, maybe not even that, and then rather than lock in on I'm wishy-washy, I can get curious and say, can you help me understand what it is that I'm doing? Well, you keep changing your mind on what you want me to do. Okay. I hear that's irritating. Yeah, you damn right. That's irritating and it's frustrating. Okay. I can't thank you enough for letting me know. Because unless you let me know, I can't do something about it. What shall we do? Okay, here's a quick anecdote, but it's a wonderful one. When my husband's and my son was a junior in college, he was going away to look at East Coast schools, because of course on the West Coast, all the kids go east for college. And his dad was going to take him on this tour. And And he came in the kitchen that day and said, Mom, don't send me with Dad. This is going to be terrible, a big disaster. I said, why not? Why? He's like, oh, God. Dad, you know, Dad, he's like the Energizer Bunny. He's going to be at the front of every line. He's going to ask a million questions. And then we're going to get in the car and he's going to want to know what I think of this one. And he thought the library at the other one was better. It's going to be very bad. Don't send us. I said, well, gee, Nick, you either go with your dad or we don't go. Our spring breaks don't correspond. So, it sounds like you have feedback for him. So I don't know how many of you have teenage kids, but I got the teenage eye roll. How could I have not known that's what you were going to tell me? And so at dinner that night, no, first he says, but can you imagine how much it'll hurt his feelings? I said, what do you think will hurt his feelings more? For you not to tell him, for you to find an end run and not go, or for you to tell him? Then he's like, can you tell him? I said, no, not how it works. So at dinner that night, he, looks at Andy and says, so Dad, Mom says I have to tell you this. It doesn't matter how you get into it. And he says, I don't want to go on this trip with you. And these are the reasons. I'm going to be embarrassed. All the kids are going to be like, oh my God, that guy's that kid's dad. Can you imagine how terrible that would be? It's going to be terrible. And so Andy, having been married to me for quite a while by then, what do you imagine were the first words out of Andy's mouth?
That's interesting. It sounds like something he probably accepted it. And
first words out of Andy's mouth, consider this being the first words out of your mouth anytime somebody gives you feedback. Thank you. Wow. I can't tell you Andy said, I can't tell you how much I appreciate you caring enough about our relationship to say that. I bet it was hard. And I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. I was sitting next to Nick. I watched his shoulders just drop. And then Andy said, so what shall we do about it? He didn't argue with him. He didn't say, I'm not the Energizer Bunny. He didn't say, I don't do that. He said, what shall we do about it? At which point they moved into problem solving. And you know what they decided? They decided they would park the car at a place certain, agree what time they'd meet back there. They could each go their own ways. If they joined the same tour, nobody would know they were related. Andy could still be at the front of the line asking his million questions. Nick could walk away if he wanted to. And at the end, they'd meet back. And then the other thing they agreed to was that Andy would wait until Nick said, okay, Dad, I'm ready to talk about this place. And guess what? They went, completely changed their relationship. And the bookend of that story is that Nick did go east. And when he came back west to go to a well-known business school in Palo Alto, he called Andy and said, hey, Dad, how about a road trip? So the next time you are afraid to tell somebody, to give somebody a piece of feedback, remember Nick and Andy. And when you get a piece of feedback from somebody who you care about the relationship, think of Nick and Andy.
Well, I'm glad you told us that story. That was a very good one. I think that I might be, hold on, Carole. I think I might have accidentally.
You made me small on the picture.
I made you small. I don't want to do that.
That's okay. I thought for some reason you wanted to be more prominent, but they can still see me.
Do here. No, I didn't.
Oh, now we can only see me.
Yep. We should be bringing us both back here.
Okay. Oh, now I see you little.
Yep.
Isn't technology grand?
It's just grand. And we've been working through this platform, which I hope no one from Crowdcast is here, but we might reconsider. Listen, in our last couple of minutes, as we work on this focus thing here, shift a little bit of focus. Yeah. And you even start the book right off, setting the stage for the world that we live in right now, which is social media, sharing of lives publicly, large collective, large scale connections in some worlds. And how can we put this idea of interpersonal relationships in that context, because it's likely it's not just well, I guess I'll put my phone away for a little bit, but realistically speaking, how can we think about that in today's world?
So I'll tell you that I think one of the things that depresses me is that I think social media has actually contributed to less connection. The fact that I might have several thousand friends on Facebook does not mean I have any friends, at least not the way I define it. The fact that I'm connected to thousands of people on LinkedIn doesn't mean I feel connected to thousands of people. So, and by the way, once COVID came along and we went to Hollywood Squares, it's become even harder. And I think people have experienced even more disconnection. Now, layer on that how much divisiveness there is in this country, and people are even more disconnected. In fact, I used to think the course should be called Connecting Across Differences instead of Interpersonal Dynamics, because it's easy to connect with people that are just like you. And yet, I mean, I talked a moment ago about how depressing and disillusioning the last 6 months have been. One of the people on a small podcast I was on, when he went on and on about how everybody needs to read this book, I said, well, so then why are we having so much trouble getting picked up by any mainstream media or big podcasts? He said, oh, that's easy. If you'd written a book, 4 easy steps to getting rid of the toxic people in your life, you'd have a runaway bestseller. How depressing is that? And where is the leadership in that? So first, notice, become aware of the impact of technology on how connected you feel, truly connected. And that means first you got to start with some awareness, and then you've got to decide whether or not you want to proactively and intentionally do something about that. And in COVID, hybrid, et cetera days, it's even more important to double down on everything we've been talking about, because tasks have become even more foregrounded. Relationships have become even more backgrounded. People are, working on teams, some of whom have never met. I have one of my Leaders in Tech fellows uses something that he learned from us that we use a lot in Leaders in Tech, which is something called If You Really Knew Me. And that means that at the start of his biweekly executive meeting with his 6 direct reports, they start with 1.5 minutes apiece, which they time, and they have to complete the sentence, if you really knew me right now, you would know. And they have to use 3 feeling words. They all get a vocabulary of feelings in Lit and Leaders in Tech. And of course, it's in the appendix of the book. And they have to come up with 3 feeling words. Feelings it's called touchy-feely for a reason, because of the emphasis on feelings in creating more robust relationships. Feelings are what give meaning to facts. If I tell you I went ziplining with my family, well, okay, that's a fact. You learned something. If I tell you I went ziplining with my family and I was exhilarated, that tells you something else about me. If I tell you I went ziplining with my family and I was terrified, but I went because I felt coerced and I didn't want to be left behind, which is the truth, you learned something else about me. So there's a discipline in learning to include feelings within your communication, because it's like treble and clef in music. Thoughts, no feelings, only half the message.
I'll sort of close this out. What you mentioned before, and the way you suggest people walk through this book is to choose 5 people or a handful of people that they want to practice with. And you're reminding me of one thing that I did last year during COVID. And I put on the side of my desk a little Post-it that were, I think it was 7 or 8 people who I wanted to be in more. They were important people, not business contacts. They were like my girlfriends. They were that type of thing.
Yeah.
And in this time period where all I need to say is 2020. And I had this list and I said, this is important to me. And I want to try, because I need everybody needed something last year, right? And I knew that was where I was going to get it because of these types of relationships and that type of thing. And I had that list.
Right.
And I think that could be another way to really be conscious about where those relationships are. Also helps you to sort of get out from the noise and really understand and target.
Totally.
So
now there's a couple of other suggestions. So if you go to our book website, connectandrelate.com, under activities, there's a free downloadable assessment. How interpersonally skilled am I? There's a free downloadable start your own learning group. Bring a few people together. I know of people who've done that at work with their teams. I know of people who've done that as kind of like a book club with friends. There's all kinds of ways to work on this if you want to. And it's a little bit of a chicken and egg. If I'm too exhausted, then I'm like, I'm too exhausted, I'm too tired. And that sounds like work, and it is work. On the other hand, if I don't invest the work, I actually am even more exhausted. In a different way, of course, because human beings are wired for connection, as Brene Brown would say, and a lot of people don't know how to really create it in the first place, and they've really had a lot of things get in their way in the last year and a half.
Yep, love it. This is actually such a good way to close this, and just so everybody knows, those resources and one or two others, especially including a link to the book, we will send out post session along with a recording for everybody. We will also in the coming weeks, with Carole's permission, and Carole, check with you, we'll have a transcript available as well. So many good things. And Carole, if you were following, we got a couple of comments in here. Just sounds like some people found this very insightful. So
thanks. I will also note that there weren't a whole lot of questions, which, by the way, is a teacher's worst nightmare. But that's for another time because we're out of time.
Yeah, exactly. And I've been there too with the students in front of you, and oh my gosh, anybody?
Like, oh my God, what does that mean? Nobody has any questions?
Oh, look, somebody just bought the book. So
oh, thank you.
And
thank you, Caitlin. I feel supported and affirmed.
I love it. And to your note about needing to get this in the hands of more people, agreed. We'll do our part where we can, because I do think this is just so important. And thank you so much today for your time, Carole, and hope to chat with you more moving forward. And thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Really, really appreciate it.
Wonderful. Well, have a fantastic day to everybody.
Yep. Take good care, everyone. And may you go forth and truly connect with more people in your life. A richer, more rewarding life.
Bye.